Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. For those online, please mute yourself when you are not speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members online, please use the raise hand function. For interpretation online, you have the choice at the bottom of the screen of either floor, English or French. Those in the room can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. I ask all participants to be careful when handling the earpieces in order to prevent feedback. Before we start with the work of today, I just think everyone was circulated a copy of the project budget for this pre-study, and I think everybody's in favor of the budget. Opposed, it carries. So thank you very much. And I will be leaving the chair at 11:45 this morning, and Mr. Seeback will be assuming the chair. So thank you, Mr. Seeback. Pursuant to the Standing Order 1082, and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, October 17, 2023, the committee is resuming its study. Oops.
That's C57.
Yes. We are beginning the subject matter of C57. We have appearing with us the Honourable Mary Ng, Minister of Export Promotion, International Trade and Economic Development. Very happy to have you visiting us today. And from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we have Bruce Christie, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Trade Negotiator, Carl Van Kessel, Deputy Director, Investment Trade Policy, Katie Kasaba, Executive Director, Ukraine Bureau, Dean Foster, Director, Trade Negotiations, Africa, Americas, Europe, India, Middle East. Why, they haven't got any room to add anything else onto that. Adam Douglas, Senior Counsel and Deputy Director, Investment and Services Law. Welcome to all of you. We appreciate you all finding the time to come in and to share the information with us. We will start with opening remarks. And Minister Ng, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madam Chair. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Let me begin by acknowledging that I appear before you today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss Bill C-57, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act, or CUFTA. Comme vous le savez, alors que le projet de loi...
As you know, when the Bill C-57, we're still examining it in the House, and we are undertaking preliminary negotiations with the implementation of the agreement.
G7 trade ministers meeting in Japan, multilateral institutions like the G7 helped to establish an era of unprecedented global stability and prosperity. That stability, however, is now under threat from autocratic and illiberal regimes abroad. Of course, nowhere is this threat to liberal democracy more obvious than in Ukraine. Let me be very clear, our government will stand with Ukraine until they win this war, and we will be there to help Ukraine recover from the devastating impacts of Russia's illegal invasion. A modernized CUFTA will play a crucial role in that process. Canada and Ukraine have unique and storied shared history. This modernized trade agreement represents a historic milestone in the Canada-Ukraine relationship. While the original CUFTA was comprehensive from a trade in goods perspective, it did not include chapters on services, investment, inclusive trade, and other areas that Canada now often seeks in our comprehensive FTAs. So, in July of 2019, Prime Minister Trudeau and President Zelensky announced plans to modernize the agreement. And following delays of COVID-19, my Ukrainian counterpart, First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of the Economy, Yulia Shrivenko, and I announced the launch of modernization negotiations in January of 2022. As we all know, less than a month later, Russia began its illegal full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This caused another few months of delay until May of 2022, when Minister Shrivadenko conveyed to me her government's readiness to initiate and indeed expedite negotiations to strengthen the bilateral relationship and support Ukraine's long-term economic and trade interests. This is no minor detail, and I'm sure the committee is aware that the Conservative member for Cumberland Colchester has suggested that Canada somehow took advantage of our Ukrainian allies as part of the FTA negotiations. In fact, this is precisely the opposite. It was our Ukrainian friends who set the pace for these negotiations. They did so with conviction, and they did so in the face of significant, even existential challenges and threats. In conversations with my Ukrainian counterpart, she stressed time and again the value Ukraine places on its relationship with Canada and how important it was that Canada to proceed with these negotiations as a sign of confidence to Ukraine. And Canada will always be an unwavering ally to a sovereign and independent Ukraine. In June of 2022, Canadian and Ukrainian officials set to work. The conclusion of these negotiations was announced on April 11, 2023, and recently this landmark initiative came full circle when Prime Minister Trudeau and President Zelensky signed the final modernized CUFTA in Ottawa in September. Cet accord permettra aux entreprises canadiennes.
This agreement will allow Canadian enterprises to have access to Ukraine and will ensure the development of the commercial interests of Ukraine in the long term.
Characterize this agreement as woke. Honestly, I don't know what they mean by that. This is a high-standard trade agreement that is good for Canadian businesses and for Ukrainian businesses. But for Ukraine, the agreement is much more than that. It's a manifestation of Ukrainian territorial and economic sovereignty. It's an expression of the values of openness and democracy. And it's made possible by an international rules-based order. Vladimir Putin, of course, despises all of these things. And when members of the official opposition grasp at straws to criticize this agreement, I'm left to wonder if they realize that it's Putin's agenda that they're advancing when they do so. In fact, by serving as a demonstration of Ukraine's ability to adhere to ambitious commitments in a range of areas, this agreement will serve as a model for Ukraine's efforts to advance economic integration with other partners around the world. This agreement will be a strategic advantage, and show confidence in a free and democratic Ukraine. And in 2 weeks' time, I will be participating in the second annual Rebuilding Ukraine conference in Toronto, where Minister Shrivadenko and I have been both invited to speak about a modernized CUFTA. I have yet to write my remarks for that event, but I know what's for sure. But those in attendance and those following the conference across Canada and Ukraine expect and deserve results. They don't want to hear me talk about partisan politics. They don't want to hear me talk about conservative procedural games. They want to hear about our progress. They want to hear about how we're on track to pass this bill. They want to hear about what our parliament can do when we work together and when we show our unwavering support to Ukraine. That's the message I want to deliver. Colleagues, I'm confident that we can meet the moment that is before us. Avec nos fonctionnaires incroyables, je suis.
With our incredible partners, I'm ready to discuss and to reply to any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Strang. On to Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Minister, I find your comment in your opening remarks that criticizing or finding things to criticize within a trade agreement is somehow helping Vladimir Putin to be somewhat despicable. I think that's an unacceptable comment to make about other members of Parliament. Secondly, Conservative members of Parliament unanimously support Ukraine, and your insinuation that somehow we don't, I also find somewhat contemptuous. Turning to the trade agreement itself, can you tell me which section in the Canada-EU free trade agreement has a mention of carbon pricing or a carbon tax?
Well, let me begin on your comments around my opening remarks. I think to suggest that the Government of Canada took advantage of Ukraine when exactly the opposite was done was something that I should put on record and clarify. When a member calls this legislation woke, I would like to suggest what would woke mean. Is it because there are progressive elements in it that protect the environment, that provide opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses, that for the very first time has a chapter for Indigenous trade opportunities? And to your question around the EU Free Trade Agreement, we're so proud of CETA because of its standards.
Proportional time for question and response. So what section in CETA has a carbon tax or a carbon price?
CETA has provisions that protect the environment.
It does not have anything in there on a carbon tax or a carbon price. CPTPP, what section of CPTPP talks about a carbon tax or a carbon price?
I respect those questions, but I thought I was here talking about Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement.
If you don't know the answer to the question, you can just say that, Minister. What section of CPTPP has a carbon price or a carbon tax in it?
What I would say is that in those agreements, CPTPP and in CETA, there are strong provisions to protect the environment, and it's in fact those very provisions where you are seeing reports from the chief economist where exports by Canadian exporters, particularly around environmental goods, have actually increased. So there are good benefits for Canadian businesses.
There's no actual section that mentions a carbon price or a carbon tax in either of those agreements. Is that correct?
Both of those agreements have strong environmental provisions,
Okay.
and we're really proud about that.
If you can't answer the question, that's fine. What about in CUSMA? What section in CUSMA has a carbon tax or a carbon price in it? You can just tell us the section. If you don't know, you can say, I don't know, rather than talking about other aspects of that agreement.
Well, I like to talk about the other aspects of the agreement because they actually are really good for Canadian businesses, and they put us on the strength of being able to build towards economies that are going to increasingly fight climate change, but
no
also
one's
create opportunities
no one's disputing
for
the
those
value
businesses.
of trade agreements. I'm asking you what sections in those trade agreements include a carbon price or a carbon tax. If you don't know the answer, which you seem to not, I will tell you none of them have that in those trade agreements. Absolutely zero. So why would you include in a trade agreement at a country in the middle of a war a carbon tax? How can that possibly help Ukraine? You talked about aiding Vladimir Putin. Putting a carbon tax into a trade agreement absolutely aids Vladimir Putin.
Well, let me share with you, and I think you know, and I think you would agree, that the energy sector is really important to the Canadian economy. And in fact, it was on the signing of this, the completion of this agreement by the two leaders of the country, that Aecon Group here in Canada, along with Ukraine Hydro Energo, signed a cooperation agreement to develop a partnership agreement on the construction of hydroelectric power plants in Ukraine. It's agreements like this, it's an agreement like this that actually enables companies to do exactly that around providing energy security and to work with Ukraine as they are rebuilding so that they are not only fighting climate change, but they are actually dealing with energy security in the country.
That's interesting. You didn't answer my question, which is fine, but that's interesting on energy security. You've got absolutely nothing in this trade agreement on energy security, do you? There's no chapter on it, but there's a chapter that puts in a carbon tax. Am I correct there?
This agreement is a terrific agreement because it provides the conditions for businesses to be a part of that rebuild effort in Ukraine, and you saw that with this really important Canadian company that builds all around the world, and certainly to do a hydroelectric power plant in Ukraine, I think is something quite remarkable. So I congratulate that company.
Where's the section in the agreement that talks about electric capacity generation or natural gas development? Ukraine has some of the largest natural gas deposits in Europe. You talk about confronting Vladimir Putin. The best way to do that is to take away his energy money that he gets. Where's the section to develop the LNG resources for Ukraine in this agreement?
I think that the agreement in itself that actually provides greater certainty, and with the new chapters on services, which are engineering services that will actually come from the ancillary work that comes, for those companies to be in that space.
So there's no section on that. So effectively, in Canada, you and the Prime Minister are pausing the carbon tax on certain parts of Canadians, while at the same time imposing a carbon tax in a trade agreement on a country in the middle of the war. I think your priorities on this trade agreement are absolutely wrong.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seebeck. On to Mr. Miao, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Minister, thank you for you being here today to discussing on this important legislation alongside with your impressive group of officials from Global Affair. I've been following this debate in the House very closely, and it was my honor to speak on Bill C-57 during the second reading. You mentioned in your remark, and I'm quite troubled to hear that Conservative members for Cumberland Colchester suggested that Canada was quoted taking advantage of Ukraine by working with them on negotiating this so-called woke free trade agreement. You serve as a minister responsible for international trade since 2019, and you've been around the table and showed leadership as part of these negotiations. I'd like to know, based on your experience, could you respond further to a suggestion made by the Conservative member?
I want to thank my honorable colleague for that question. I, too, was troubled by the comments because it simply hasn't matched anything that I heard in every step of the negotiation. You know, time and again, Ukraine had signaled that they were committed to seeing these discussions through to a point where we could land a modernized agreement. I heard from Ukrainian counterparts, my Ukrainian counterparts, but also directly from President Zelensky when he was here, that the free trade agreement will help form the basis for the reconstruction of Ukraine following Russia's illegal invasion. And I've heard from business leaders and community leaders in Canada that they want to play an important role in the rebuilding of Ukraine once they have won this illegal war, and how important that a modernized trade agreement will be in helping them do exactly that. So I'm proud of the fact that this legislation is both comprehensive and ambitious, and if Conservatives want to throw around terms like woke to try to undermine the relationship with Ukraine, they might want to explain to Canadians why they want to do that.
Thank you. And to your point, Minister, I believe our Ukrainian counterpart has signaled how beneficial this free trade agreement will be for Ukraine and in their trade discussion with other countries as well. Do I have that right?
Well, it's absolutely true. Ukraine has told us that this comprehensive trade agreement that has, in trade circles, they call it high standards, will really serve as a model for them as they pursue agreements with other countries. This isn't sort of new. Canada has taken a lead on supporting Ukraine, really right from the get-go, and so when we say we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, it isn't just in humanitarian assistance or, supporting with their military efforts, but it really is also supporting the economic reconstruction when that is able to happen. And I hope that we can really demonstrate a Team Canada approach. As I said in my opening remarks, I think that we can rise to this challenge. I think that we can collaborate in support of Ukraine, and it would be terrific that we work very hard to get this bill through the House and into the Senate and for ratification.
Thank you, Minister. And you just mentioned in your comment that the trade circle and talking about CUFTA is a high-quality agreement. What factors have helped to make this case from your perspective?
Well, this agreement is comparable to the agreements that we have with the United States and Mexico in CUSMA, with the European Union, with CETA, with countries along the Pacific Rim in CPTPP. It has provisions in there for, it has some of the best practice provisions in there to protect the environment, to have standards to protect workers, to allow small to medium-sized businesses to benefit from the benefits of this trade agreement. And I think it's an agreement that Canadians and Ukrainians can really be proud of.
Thank you very much, Minister. And through the chair, I'd like to ask my next question to Mr. Christie. You have served as a Canada Chief Trade Negotiator for other trade agreements, and I thank you and your team for the important work. Could you provide our committee with an overview of how the process was different from past negotiations and how you work with your Ukrainian counterpart to advance this treaty to where it is today?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. In this case, I think compared to other free trade negotiations, which tend to be, I think, more labor-intensive and drag on for a longer period of time. First of all, when Ukraine approached us, somewhat surprisingly, in May of last year, indicating that they were ready to launch modernization negotiations, We, of course, were dealing with the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also dealing with a negotiating partner who was found themselves in situations where they often didn't have electricity, power, they didn't have access to the internet. So this was a negotiation where we had to be very creative in how we could engage with our opposite numbers. I remember having a call with my Ukrainian counterpart who was taking the call from his car because he felt that was the most secure place for him to be at the time. So it was one where we kind of threw out the rule book and we engaged with a very, formidable partner who was committed to a process. We put forward options in terms of negotiating templates, and Ukraine continued to advise us that they wanted to meet Canada's high standards. So we pursued that avenue. It was a different experience, but I have to tell you, I walked away from the experience feeling very inspired from dealing with my Ukrainian counterparts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you
On
for-
to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Don't criticize me, Ms. There are agreements that are good, others are less good. This is the work of the opposition to ask questions and to criticize. And like other colleagues, I'm very happy with some of the elements in the agreement, but we seem to have turned the page on the free trade agreements of the triumphal neoliberalism, or where we were much more aggressive. But and after the health crisis, the epidemic, and after the agreement between Canada, U.S., Mexico, why after removing these some provisions from the U.S.-Mexico agreement with the epidemic experience, where we know what is the importance of a healthy health sector. Why have it different in this agreement? Thank you very much for your question.
How much I respect the work that you and that the committee does, and particularly around this agreement. You may remember that last year, on a couple of occasions, officials were here at the committee just as we were launching the process for negotiations to appear here before the committee, so that indeed it provided opportunities for our colleagues, each other as parliamentarians, to to ask questions and for for officials to be able to provide answers to that. Maybe I can ask a clarification, because I'm not sure I understood the question fully. I mean, around the provisions that are here. I mean, we undertook to modernize it because there were just some provisions that weren't in this agreement, in which is what it needed for modernization. We had a really terrific goods agreement with Ukraine, but it didn't have provisions for services, for investments, for.
Attention, je précise ma question dans ce cas-là pour.
I'll try to explain my question. In this agreement, there are regulations which are different from in other agreements. I mean, there are other things that would not be continued, but yet you have continued some of these in this agreement.
So through the course of negotiations, I think you heard the chief negotiator talk about, about an approach that we took here with Ukraine that really, on the one hand, protects and, in fact, I would say even improve upon the agreements that we already have. Like, so in this agreement, it's got some of the strongest environmental protections of any agreements that we have in what Canada has with any other country right now. There's also, for the first time, an Indigenous chapter. So the course of improving agreements is very much what we do.
Pourquoi inclure des dispositions?
Why are there provisions that allow foreign businesses and investors to take legal action against states?
ISDS, I think, is the question. Thank you very much for asking that. It was indeed the Ukrainians who actually asked for that. And the reason for that is, at this juncture, they actually realize how important it is for Ukraine to be able to attract investment. I know certainly that in the Canadian business community, they're an investor community. They do want to actually make investments in Ukraine. So they're looking for a chapter like this around investor protection so that they can have the certainty that they want, that they will, in order to incentivize for that investment. So that's actually the reason the Ukrainians actually asked for it, because they understood that that would help. But I want to also assure you that we, Canada, remain and have retained the right to regulate and to maintain our policy flexibility, particularly around issues of around the environment, around labor, around Indigenous rights. So we've protected that piece, but we also responded because the situation here for Ukraine, particularly at this time, is to create assurances for investors who wish to invest in Ukraine, and they believe that having this chapter was actually going to be helpful.
Mais le RDIE, faisons un cas de figure.
But beyond your intentions, I wasn't at the table. I don't know what came from Canada or Ukraine. But in fact, the RBA, there for a foreign investor can, as we had in NAFTA, there is a possibility for expropriation. We had the Ukrainian government. Which sanctioned a number of its citizens and in some cases seized their property because they were collaborating with Russia. In a case where a Ukrainian citizen also had investments with Canada, could Canada seize the property of these citizens, or would you invoke the RBA?
So the goal always is to negotiate agreement in in the best interests of Canadians. Always, that's certainly our job. And in fact, if there's any tensions around the negotiating table, it's always because we're pushing for what is the best for Canadians. You talked about CUSMA when we renegotiated that. And in that instance, it made perfect
J'en reviens à ma question. Un citoyen ukrainien.
I come back to the question. A Ukrainian citizen who has invested in Canada but was collaborating with Russia, could Ottawa seize their property as Ukrainian did on its territory? Or would those Ukrainian citizens with investments in Canada be able to have recourse to this to resist the effect by the government Canada?
Because it's.
So
I gave Mr. Savard-Tremblay the extra time to repeat his question.
Let me take the opportunity to get better information and return to you on your question. I think that's the best thing to do.
Merci.
Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and thank you, Minister, for being here, and everyone else. We're doing this pre-study because we're told that this is a hurry-up situation. We want to get this done before Christmas or something. But as an opposition member here on this side, this is, I think Mr. Foster described this as a brick or something, a 1,000-page document. It's very difficult for us to quickly assess what's in these agreements when we're told this is in a hurry-up situation. And we have policies that help us with that. And first of all, there's a policy regarding parliamentary oversight before starting negotiations. It stems from a letter that the NDP got from Chrystia Freeland back in 2020 saying, when we were doing CUSMA, saying that there was going to be a new government policy, that there should be a notice of intent to start negotiations sent out 90 days before those negotiations start. That notice should come to this committee. There should be a notice of the objectives for negotiations that was going to be sent out 30 days before negotiations start. That should come to this committee. And there should be an economic assessment tabled with the implementing legislation. I don't think any of that was done for this. I can't find any record of this committee receiving these notices. There's also a policy in writing, a policy on tabling treaties in Parliament, where the minister will table all agreements with an explanatory memo 21 sitting days before taking any action to bring an agreement into force. Otherwise, the implementing legislation. That memo I have here, the explanatory memo, it was apparently written on 22nd of September, but it was tabled in Parliament on the 17th of October when the treaty was tabled as well. So we had no heads up, we had no way of assessing the treaty before, boom, the implementing legislation was tabled, and this is what we're debating here today. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on if you wanted this to be hurried up. I mean, there was stakeholder consultations back in 2020, but this committee wasn't involved in that at all. So I'm just wondering if you can say, it's so important to have real feedback from the opposition, is to give them time to prepare for something as big as this. And I'm just wondering why this was not done.
Well, thank you very much, and I always appreciate the members, sort of good feedback and comment to me and to the government on, on this and on other matters. And I want to thank you and your party for supporting this FTA in the House. On this agreement in particular, particularly since its negotiations, we were here, Global Affairs was here, the officials were here in February of 2022 and in April of 2022 to have a full and ample conversation and discussion, giving colleagues an opportunity to ask, any questions that they would like to the officials on this particular agreement. In addition to the regular consultative processes that it has with with stakeholders and others, but the work that parliamentarians do, I agree with you, is utterly important. With respect to the obligation to do the to provide the notice, there is a provision that allows for some ability to to not do that in some instances, and in this one, I'll be candid. I mean, we elected to do that because the Ukrainian my Ukrainian colleagues asked for for this expedition for the expedited method for this trade agreement because they had wanted to take it through their legislative process. So that's what we did in this instance. We came here. We had taught. The officials came here. I would also say that that with respect to the economic impact assessment, it's not required unless they're new, unless it's a new agreement. So this one is not a new agreement. This is an existing agreement that's modernized. But what we did do and has been published fully is that we did in-depth environmental, but also gender-based analysis, so GBA plus assessments, were both conducted and published for this agreement.
You have 42 seconds remaining, Mr. Cannings.
Okay, but again, I just wondered, one of the main things in policy says that there should be 21 working days, that's a month or more, between tabling of the text of the treaty with the enabling legislation. We got those on the same day, and you didn't suggest that Ukraine wanted to speed this up, you said. So you would think that would speed it up, and I just want to, I guess, express my disappointment that you're making it difficult for us here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cannings. On to Mr. Seaback for 5 minutes, please.
Minister, do you consider CO2 pollution?
Yes.
Yes?
Sorry, what is the question? Is air pollution?
No, the question is, do you consider CO2 emissions to be pollution? Do you not know?
I don't know.
Okay. You don't know. That's interesting. So you put in in this trade agreement, Article 13.3, Sub 3, that those who pollute the environment should bear the cost of that pollution. But you don't know what constitutes pollution? Are CO2 emissions pollution in your mind under this trade agreement?
What I think is really
Carbon emissions that you guys talk about all the time, is that pollution?
what's in this agreement are some of the highest environmental standards, which the Ukrainians and Canada agree to, because we both agree that fighting climate change is good, and that as they're going to rebuild their economy and as they're going to rebuild their industries, as they're going to rebuild from this illegal war, that what they are able to do is actually fight climate change, but also build out their economy. So that's what's here, and I'm really proud that that the officials here in Canada, but also in Ukraine, negotiated the highest environmental standards in a trade
Minister,
agreement that we've
I'm not going
had.
to let you talk out the clock on things not related to the question. You put in a section in this trade agreement that says that people who pollute the environment should bear the cost of that pollution. You and your colleagues always say that carbon emissions are a pollutant. That's why you've got a carbon tax in Canada. So you're reinforcing the Canadian carbon tax in a trade agreement with a country at war. And I'll explain why this is such a problem. 50% of Ukrainian electricity generation has been destroyed by the war, and you're suggesting that Ukrainians who use carbon, 60% of their electricity is from coal and gas, and you're suggesting that's pollution and they should pay for the pollution. If you want to support Ukraine, why would you put something like that in a trade agreement as they're going to struggle through a winter?
I think that's your reading of how this trade agreement is going to work. The intention and in fact what happened at the negotiating table is to negotiate an agreement that actually has high standards. You know why that's important? Because if I look at the investments that have come into Canada for electricity generation, for battery production, it's precisely because Canada has a competitive regime that puts a price on pollution. And if you look at that internationally, that's actually creating confidence among investors, global investors. And I think Ukraine wants to attract global investors. And I think that they want to fight climate change.
You want to impose a carbon tax on Ukraine through trade. So it's interesting. So are you aware that Ukraine has difficulty importing natural gas due to the financial strains of the war? They actually have trouble getting it when winter's coming. Where's the agreement? Where's the section in this agreement to help develop Ukraine's natural gas? And because you probably don't know this, because you seem to not have been able to answer any of my question, Ukraine has the second largest natural gas deposits in all of Europe. So rather than putting in a section to say we're going to use Canadian expertise, we're very good at this, to help develop Ukrainian natural gas, so that would also, they could export it, defund Putin's war machine, which is critical. Instead of doing that, you put in a section saying that the Ukrainian person heating their home with coal-fired electricity or LNG electricity is a polluter. That's your priority?
Our priority is to stand with Ukraine. Our priority is to create an agreement so that it creates confidence for Canadian businesses to invest. Our priority is to meet the aspirations of Canadian companies who wish to export. Our
doesn't need aspirations. They need to develop their LNG. That's what they need. It's not in this agreement. Why not?
This agreement provides the conditions to actually enable that to happen, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Mr. Sidhu, please.
Well, thank you, Minister, and thank you to the officials from Global Affairs Canada for joining us here today. And look, I've heard from many stakeholders on this, and they're looking forward to this. They know this agreement will provide them that basis to make investments in Ukraine, to make investments in Canada, so we can continue to grow industries in both of our countries. Whether we're talking about clean technology, we're talking about environmental impacts that businesses can have, I think this agreement really strives to promote that. And so, Minister, when you introduced this bill, you also mentioned your intention to lead a business delegation to Ukraine. And I know those trade delegations and business delegations that are sent abroad are very impactful and very resourceful for many businesses. Could you share more of your hope of what leading a business delegation to Ukraine would have?
Thank you very much. I always say that agreements are only one part of the work. the other part of the work is, why are they there in the first place? They're there to create the conditions for businesses to be able to export, for businesses to invest, and when businesses do well, then workers benefit as well, because they create great jobs for workers. I'm very thrilled to lead a business delegation. I'm going to look forward to working with Canadian business organizations like the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce and many others who've talked to me about wanting to be there in Ukraine, wanting to be a part of that rebuilding effort, whether it is in rebuilding infrastructure, whether it is partnering on digital, on the range of digital and e-commerce type of businesses, or the range of services like engineering services or design services that are so necessary as part of, let's say, an infrastructure build. So I'm looking forward to working with Canadian businesses and investors who are who have said to me that they want to be there and that they want to see their government lead a delegation and create those, that environment, the conditions. And I'll work with my Ukrainian counterpart so that we can put, customers to buyers, I suppose, but to facilitate really that Team Canada trade.
Thank you for that. And just to follow up to the officials here, we hear from business leaders and organizations on how can they get involved in some of these trade delegations, and really hoping to learn more about how they can potentially participate. Is there information you can provide on how they can get involved in this process of going on a trade delegation?
So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just returned from a business mission, the first Team Canada mission into the Indo-Pacific, the large-scale one. I've done several of them, but not at this scale. To Japan, we had about 250 people making up about 150 businesses, and we utilized the network of what I call Team Canada Trade. So we have very strong capabilities in Canada to support the work of businesses who wish to go there. We will, no question, advertise the date in which we to which we will plan this mission. But we're going to do that in collaboration with the business organizations here in Canada, but also in Ukraine, who want to, to see the range of businesses, whether it's agri-foods, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's in energy, digital services, in e-commerce, in engineering services, and likely many more. I won't, I will always do the work, listening to them and where they see the opportunities, and we'll be there to support them and to facilitate that work.
Thank you, Minister. And in the CUFTA, I was happy to see a chapter dedicated to small and medium-sized businesses. What is the objective of this chapter, and how will it help businesses in my riding of Brampton East benefit from further opportunities?
Well, in Canada and in all of our provinces, small and medium-sized businesses make up about anywhere from 95+% of all of our businesses. And our most innovative businesses are those very entrepreneurs and businesses. We have certainly made it a priority in our government to ensure that the benefits of trade are accrued to as broadly as possible. So to small and medium-sized businesses, some of those small and medium-sized businesses are also women-owned, they're Indigenous-owned, they are, they're new immigrant-owned, or they are, they're businesses that have often been underrepresented in our economy. So programs like the Trade Accelerator program that actually gives businesses that capacity building, so that they are looking at new markets and how they might grow their business through export, is what we have been doing, along with programs like Can Export that helps businesses take advantage of opportunities in the international marketplace. But SMEs are absolutely crucial. Why? Because they make up such a big part of our economy, and when they do well in our communities, they're creating incredibly wonderful jobs. And when those small businesses are also those that have often been underrepresented in our economy, like women-owned businesses or Indigenous businesses, that's really when inclusive trade really works and grows our communities, grows our economy, and creates jobs that are great jobs.
Thank you very much, Minister. On to Mr. Savard Tremblay, please, for 2.5 minutes.
First of all, I'm coming back to my question. Do you have the information about my question from earlier?
Round, we will try.
Donc, vous pouvez nous communiquer ça la prochaine. Parfait.
You can provide that with us later. And with regard to transparency and fighting corruption, with regard to the responsibility of businesses, there are provisions with regard to the responsibility of businesses. The government's very proud of this chapter, but these are voluntary measures. It's a section that encourages businesses to adopt international standards with regard to responsibility, social responsibility, but it's voluntary. There is nothing for follow-up or enforcement. How will you be sure that these principles are adopted and followed?
In Canada, we have, policy on responsible business conduct. We expect Canadian companies, when they operate, whether it's here or abroad, to operate with the highest standards for corporate social responsibility and to certainly exercise responsible business conduct. And through that policy, there are mechanisms and recourses as well through that. So in the trade agreement, it really is to ensure that we have a broad trade agreement that covers sort of both goods and services, but also also the manner in which businesses do business.
Quel mécanisme de reddition de comptes?
What mechanism is there for reporting and accountability?
So for Canadian businesses operating abroad, they are subject to responsible business conduct. And for businesses that use the services of, whether it's Export Development Canada or a Trade Commissioner service, there is an expectation on that. I mean, and not only an expectation on that. I mean, if there are concerns that are raised, I mean, we, not only do we look into it, but there are circumstances where, where those very important services of the Canadian government are indeed withdrawn.
10 seconds.
En 10 secondes pour ma question précise.
With regard to my previous question, could you make a commitment to provide us something in writing before the end of our work on this file?
I'll commit to getting you an answer.
Great. We'll now go to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'm just going to turn now to the investment state dispute mechanism section. As you know, these are mechanisms that the NDP has trouble with in all the trade agreements that have come before us in recent years. The first CUFTA didn't have it because it was contained in a separate foreign investment protection agreement dating back to the 90s, I think. So, but in this new revised version, it's been rolled into the actual trade agreement, and I hear comments from yourself and other people in debate that it's new and improved, bigger and better, and I'm just wondering, well, I'll just start with how is it different? I mean, you mentioned the agreements, and there's the non-derogation clause that outlines something that they can't instigate these disputes with that in mind. But, has that been tested? How sure are you that that will protect Canadians from these sorts of disputes?
Thank you for that. So the Canada-Ukraine FIPA, so Foreign Investment Protection Agreement, that had been in place in 1995. That's what's sort of kind of come into this agreement, and I think, as I said earlier, in response to another question, this provision was very much requested by my Ukrainian colleagues, and the reason they requested it was because they understood what's in front of them. And what's in front of them is a very high need on their part to attract investments. And for Canadian investors and businesses, they look to this as a mechanism that will give them that certainty. So it's the certainty on the other way. So, and maybe to address the last part of your question, we've had no ISDS cases under FIPA with Ukraine since 1995. So we've had that with them for over 20, 30 years now, not one. So I think that gives us a degree of confidence from that standpoint. But so there's that, but there's also, Canada retaining the right to regulate, so non-derogation. So this is not about an agreement that is a race to the bottom. This is an ability to have the policy flexibility to maintain our ability to to deal with issues like the environment or labor and Indigenous rights in here. So I hope that answers that.
Well, I haven't.
Unfortunately, that's it.
That's it.
I
Okay.
gave you a little extra time there. So we'll now turn to Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Although I must say I'm extremely disappointed and essentially insulted that during your opening remarks you chose to open up with criticism of my colleagues and I on this side, members of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, for asking questions with regards to this trade agreement. And somehow you said, and this was astounding, that we're somehow advancing Putin's agenda by asking questions with regards to a free trade agreement. I just wanted to bring some, factual information forward. I mean, it must be remembered, it was a conservative government in 1991 when Canada became the first Western country to recognize Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union. And it was a previous conservative government led by Stephen Harper that Canada undertook Operation Unifier, to bolster Canadian military training of our armed forces of the Ukraine. And it was the same conservative government that the original CUFTA was negotiated between Canada and the Ukraine. So, Minister, again, somehow your comments were not only extremely disappointing, but on the verge of insulting. I mean, you claim in your comments that somehow we're looking to delay second reading debate on this, yet your government failed to call it forward for almost 2 weeks. And I see C-57 is not even on the House agenda for this week. So again, that is rather disappointing when you question us, and this government controls its legislative agenda, not members of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. Minister, in the briefing note that was provided by staff, it says Global Affairs Canada in their March 2023 initial environmental assessment, it concluded that modernization is unlikely to result in significant negative environmental impacts. Yet, within this agreement on Chapter 13, it talks about carbon pricing, a carbon tax, and measures to mitigate carbon leakage. I just wanted to ask, are those type of provisions included in CUSMA, CETA, and the CPTPP agreements that currently exist?
Well, let me thank the member from Niagara Falls for this question, and because you are right near the Canada-U.S. border, you understand and you're very familiar with how important trade agreements are, and of course it is. It is the work of all of us as parliamentarians to be able to ask questions, and I think that you misunderstood when you say that I was critical because of you asking questions about this free trade agreement. Actually, to the contrary, I think it's the appropriate work of parliamentarians like yourself in this committee to be doing that. But what I would say, I mean, around delays, is that we've seen on 2 occasions when this bill was before the House, and Conservatives moved concurrence debates instead of talking about C-57. So I hope that we can
Madam Chair,
rely on you
Minister,
to support this bill. And as I said in my opening remarks, I'm actually very confident that we can meet the moment that's before us, and I think that we all can and should support Ukraine.
Madam Minister, again, your government controls the legislative agenda. And for a 2-week period, C-57 somehow was not a priority. Somehow this week, it is not a priority. My rights as a parliamentarian to discuss it at second reading, to debate it at second reading. I have yet to have that right. And yet we're here, building out what Mr. Canning says. We're undertaking, there seemed to have been a rush to get here for this pre-study, and yet we have not even allowed our analysts the time. We've been provided a briefing note the day before this meeting on a 700-page agreement, over 700 pages, and that briefing note was 2 pages. So again, to Mr. Canning's point, I think we're doing a disservice not only to our analysts, but to all parliamentarians so that we can provide the needed input so that we get to the best agreement that benefits not only Canada, but Ukraine. And again, talking about some of the comments earlier from my colleague, 60% of Ukrainian energy is coal and gas. And nuclear is a huge aspect and leadership position for Canada, as well as natural gas. How come there's no discussion of energy security within this agreement? Energy cooperation and energy security.
Mr. Baldinelli, the time, Minister, you have, try and answer that quickly. The time's off.
I'm so thrilled that this agreement has the highest environmental standards of all of the agreements that we have with our trading partners.
Over to Madame Fortier pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour.
Thank you very much, Chair and Minister. It's a pleasure to be able to ask you some questions this morning. This agreement, as you said, this is the first time there's a chapter with regard to Indigenous entrepreneurs. In my riding, I have a number of Inuit and First Nations persons, and so this is a good time to ask you, how can this chapter help, which is new, it can help entrepreneurs from First Nations?
Reconciliation with Indigenous peoples has been a priority and continues to be for this government, and that includes economic reconciliation. I have met, as we all have, many entrepreneurs and businesses, Indigenous businesses, Inuit, Métis businesses, and working to support businesses start and to grow in Canada is terrific, but to get access and to grow into international markets is another thing. So to have a specific chapter dedicated to this for the first time in a trade agreement, I think is a real testament to the ambitions not only of us here in Canada but also our Ukrainian counterparts, and that's a really strong recognition. I've often talked in other forums where in Canada, Indigenous people were the first traders in this country, the very first. And to work alongside where Indigenous entrepreneurs and businesses can see an opportunity in this rebuild effort to start, to export, a service or to provide, to trade and to do business with, with Ukraine at the appropriate time, I think is what the long-term benefits of this agreement will be.
Merci. L'autre chapitre où
there's also a paragraph that's very interesting with regard to equal access for men and women to the opportunities offered by this agreement, and how can we ensure a full and equal participation by women in this agreement, and how can we facilitate and promote such equality?
Well, there was a GBA plus analysis done as part of this agreement, and that's now a something standard that we do. That's really excellent. But I was also, the minister that had something to do with the Women's Entrepreneurship Program, which is about creating opportunities and supports for women-owned businesses and leaders to start and to grow their businesses. Today, in that as part of the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy, some tens of thousands of women have either started their businesses or seen their existing operations and businesses grow. That's the commitment of this government and has been. It isn't just, being able to provide business supports, for women entrepreneurs. But remember, $10 a day in affordable early learning and childcare is a prerequisite, but also a really important support to help women stay in the workforce, stay in their businesses, work, to grow their businesses. Parental leave is something that this government did right at the very go, which, when I talk to businesses across the world, they look at what Canada has done, and that, it's not social policy. It's supportive economic policy in our view, and it's worked because it allows women leaders and businesses to continue to grow their businesses should they wish, and be a mom at the same time.
Oui, je comprends très bien ça. Alors,
Yes, thank you very much for your answer. And last month, this agreement with regard to cultural industries, how can you protect cultural Canadian culture in this agreement?
At the very heart of nation building for all countries, and certainly Canada is no exception. And like you, I'm very, very proud of unique Canadian culture. And in CUFTA, in this agreement, it contains a cultural exemption or exception that will preserve the parties' flexibilities to pursue cultural policy objectives. And I want to assure all members of this committee that Canada's ability to support our vibrant and flourishing cultural industries will not be affected or diminished by CUFTA. And having just returned from a trade mission in Japan with a very large contingent of cultural industries, I see firsthand at not only the excellent cultural businesses in Canada, but what they do when they grow into international markets. So I think that this agreement provides those long-term benefits for those particular categories of businesses.
And that brings us to the end of our time. Thank you for attending, Minister, and we will briefly suspend and then resume rounds with department officials. welcome to our officials, and we will now begin our rounds of questioning. And we will start with Mr. Généreux for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, and thank you, officials, for taking the time to come. Just want to get a few things on record first before I go to some of the questions, just so we're all clear in the room. Now, again, it was under the Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper that Canada undertook Operation Unifier and the Canadian Armed Forces mission to bolster the capabilities of the Armed Forces of Ukraine through the provision of critical military training. And it was under a Conservative government that on December 2nd, 1991, Canada became the first Western country to recognize Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union. Conservatives will always work to ensure that trade agreements are in the interest of Canada and all Canadians, and nobody is debating whether or not we should have a free trade agreement with Ukraine. The current agreement, as you would know here at the table, 2017, CUFTA, negotiated by Conservative Party of Canada, will remain in effect if this new agreement is not ratified. And also want to just quickly indicate that Conservatives support Ukraine 100% full stop. So with that being said, do want to get comments from whoever best here in the table is can answer this. Is there a carbon tax provision within CETA?
I don't have the direct answer to your question, but there are areas to always, in a free trade agreement, you can expand and improve upon the provisions. So there isn't a carbon tax provision in CETA, but we have an environment committee that can regularly...
Sorry, because I have another follow-up to that. So is there a carbon tax agreement in CPTPP?
No, there is not.
And then is there a carbon tax portion within CUSMA?
No, there is not.
Fair. So if, understanding all of that, there's also Ukraine's insistence on being a part of CETA as well, which we understand, correct?
CETA?
CETA, yeah.
Ukraine has indicated an interest in acceding to the CPTPP. They're also have expressed interest in joining the European Union, but to my knowledge, they have not expressed interest in the CETA.
So with there being nothing on carbon tax agreements and any of the other agreements, what makes, there's a competitive nature then I would think of having a carbon tax just limited to this agreement. So do you not agree that there should be an agreement, portion of this agreement on nuclear cooperation, a section on LNG? Would that not be of benefit to Ukraine during their time of war?
Well, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned earlier, the provisions of a trade agreement are constantly being updated. In terms of those issues, nuclear cooperation or LNG cooperation, we can discuss those issues within the Committee of the Environment chapter. There aren't specific provisions in the agreement to allow the development or promote the development of Ukraine's LNG sector. Those provisions aren't typically included in a free trade agreement. But there's nothing stopping us from engaging in discussions as they pertain to trade obligations.
So you can put in a carbon tax element to a trade agreement, but you can't put in anything that would support an LNG cooperation.
Well, I think the difference with the climate, first of all, on the climate or carbon tax point, this is a cooperation-based discussion in the agreement. There aren't binding provisions on carbon taxes or climate change. What we've included in this trade agreement is an ability for the parties to discuss, to ensure that any trade initiatives don't hinder parties' abilities to promote climate change initiatives. And that would include the imposition of a carbon tax. But those are not binding provisions, they're cooperation provisions. On development of an LNG sector, that usually is found outside of a trade agreement. There are no binding provisions in that regard. That's not to say Canada couldn't work with Ukraine further develop its LNG sector, but it's not found in this trade agreement.
So we just clarified at the beginning of my comments that usually, in your words, that there's not a carbon tax, mention of a carbon tax in previous agreements. And now you say usually there's not an inclusion of LNG in agreements. So again, what would stop the ability to put an LNG cooperation into this particular agreement?
Well, nothing would stop us, although typically in a trade agreement you deal with the rules of trade and provisions to support derogation from those rules. So in terms of promoting LNG cooperation, it typically wouldn't be something found in a trade agreement, but it's not to say we couldn't discuss it within the committee, the Environment Committee of this agreement, to look for further cooperation. But most of that work, I believe, would be found outside of a typical trade agreement.
Could you put an LNG cooperation into this trade agreement now?
Well, the text is finalized. The text has been signed by our leaders, so it would be too late to amend the agreement, but down the road, further to implementation, we could look at improving on any aspect of the agreement.
Thank you. We'll now move to our next round of questionings. Mr. Miao for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to the officials for being here today. I understand that recently Minister of Justice tabled the Charter Review Statement for Bill C-57, which is an important part of the legislative process. Could you share with the committee the determination from the Minister of Justice on this bill?
I'm sorry, I don't have that determination at hand, but I'll certainly provide it to you.
And if you can submit that to the committee.
Absolutely.
Great. And I understand here in Canada, we have our own legislative process, which, the committee is part of that process. And I'm sure in the other side, Ukraine also needs to go through their parliamentary motion to pass this agreement. Can any one of you share with our committee what the legislative process will be in Ukraine compared to Canada's?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Well, I mean, I know this committee will be meeting with or hearing from Ukraine's ambassador to Canada on Thursday, and she will be in a better position to provide the details of Ukraine's parliamentary ratification procedures. What I can share with you today is that both parties are committed to have this free trade agreement enter into force as quickly as possible. Ukraine's parliamentary system is different than Canada's, one in the sense that we have obviously two chambers of parliament. Ukraine has only one, and where each house has 3 readings of the legislation. In Canada, the Ukraine process allows for up to 3 readings, but they have a much more flexibility in how they can streamline their ratification process, and they can also table legislation in their parliament that's deemed for urgent consideration. And that's up to the president to make that determination. So even though Ukraine's process is similar to Canada's, they have more flexibility in how it can be streamlined.
And what other committees or other institutional bodies will exist under the Canada-Ukrainian Free Trade Agreement?
Well, in addition to the committees that already exist, there's a new labor committee, there's a new committee on financial services, and well, obviously the new chapters on trade and gender, trade in SMEs, and trade in Indigenous peoples. We will establish committees to monitor the implementation of those provisions as well.
Thank you. And I can see the potential of this free trade agreement benefiting my riding of Richmond Center, since there is a good group of Ukrainians settled in the community. Well, the province or territories need to sign the CUFTA to make it happen, and if not, why is that?
Well, no, they will not. This is a federal treaty. This is a treaty signed by Canada, but the the obligations in the treaty itself, although Canada is responsible for those, some of those obligations fall within provincial jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction, and we work closely with the provinces to ensure consistent application of the obligations in the free trade agreement.
And this modernized CUFTA includes an updated chapter, which earlier you mentioned it can fall under labor or finance. With the comprehensive and enforceable labor obligation. Could you provide our committee with an update on how this chapter will benefit workers and their working conditions?
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank you very much for the question. So one of the provisions of the labor chapter is that, first of all, it uses the text from Canada's I would say gold standard labor chapter found in both the CUSMA and the CPTPP. So that labor chapter and the provisions therein are fully subject to dispute settlement procedures. They also, in the chapter, there are provisions that aim to improve labor standards and working conditions by building on the international labor principles found in the ILO conventions. There's also a non-derogation provision that prohibits parties to weaken or reduce protections offered or any goods or services provided through forced labor. And also there's a standalone article on violence against workers. So these are some of the new provisions that we've included in this trade agreement that builds on CUSMA and the CPTPP.
Thank you. And let's talk about the financial service chapter. The current comprehensive and progressive financial service commitment, could you share with our committee how this chapter will help provide a level playing field between Canada and Ukraine?
Yes. So what it does in this chapter, building on some of our previous agreements, it includes core obligations such as market access, national treatment, and most favored nation treatment to Canadian financial services providers along with their Ukrainian counterparts. It also provides new commitments on electronic payments and the processing of applications, but also includes, as we would typically seek in a free trade agreement, a robust prudential exception that allows our financial service regulators to take measures to maintain the integrity and stability of the financial system. And
I'm going to have to cut you off there. We're already over time. And just for everyone in the committee, I would say if you're asking questions and you have your headpiece on, please don't lean in too close to the microphone. It's causing some challenges for our translators. I'd now like to turn it over to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I might ask some questions that I already asked to the Minister. I know that there was one response that was not available. We'll be waiting for the written response, but I'm going to come back to the issue of dispute settlement. Why has Canada still accepting to defend the use or promotion of this kind of provision, especially when it's been removed from the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement? Thank you very much for your question.
As Minister Ng mentioned earlier this morning, when we look at our obligations on investor-state dispute settlement, when we sat down with Ukraine to expand and modernize the agreement, it was Ukraine that asked us to include provisions on ISDS. And the reason they did so was because they realized during the negotiations and during the illegal war that they were going to have a major project on their hand to rebuild and reconstruct their country. And they were going to have to rely on foreign direct investment to facilitate that reconstruction. And they wanted to provide investors, foreign investors, with the additional comfort that they knew that they could invest in large-scale infrastructure projects in Ukraine and know that they were protected by the rule of law and subject to dispute settlement mechanisms between investors and the state government.
Sauf que jadis eu, pardon, avant.
But before and after, there was another provision where there was a recourse in case of a dispute, but I'd had to go through the executive of the country. But here we are reducing. We're giving multinationals the same status as states, and with regard to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. There are statistics that show that in 40% of cases, it's states that win disputes, and the others are businesses. And then in 58% of cases, it's the for-profit businesses have been able to counter the democratic will of countries. And how can Canada adopt a similar position that defends that situation?
Well, thank you for the question. Maybe I'll start by reiterating the point that under the current CUFTA agreement that came into force in 2017, neither party has brought an ISDS case forward, and we don't anticipate a flurry of ISDS challenges by investors against the governments as a result of a modernized agreement. What the ISDS provisions seek to accomplish is to provide investors with that protection in the event, as was asked in the earlier session, if a government takes an arbitrary decision to expropriate an investment, there are protections in the agreement. And also, and I wouldn't make this specific about Ukraine, but in some cases, and we tend to include ISDS provisions in our foreign investment protection agreements and our trade agreements with developing countries who don't always have the same standards of the rule of law as we do, or the legal systems. In this case, it was at the request of Ukraine to include these provisions, and we're not anticipating that it will lead to a dramatic increase in challenges against states for investments. It does build significantly on the 1994 Foreign Investment Protection Agreement.
Mais vous n'anticipez pas, mais je vous ai posé quand même.
You don't anticipate anything, but this is a simple question. Ukrainian citizen with investments here who would be expropriated and kind of could oppose the action by Ottawa. So what do you would that be your response in that kind of a situation?
Is that something you could address?
There are, I mean, let me caveat by saying it's hard to answer these things in the abstract without a concrete fact pattern. There are protections within the treaty, though, that do allow for Canada to protect its essential security interests. And there are exceptions to the obligations that Canada has undertaken when it needs to protect its essential security interests.
Donc, est-ce que c'est...
So, are these obligations, do they specifically mention in the case where a Ukrainian citizen would have a business or investments in Canada and is also in business in Ukraine? Or he was somebody who is supporting Russia? And would these exemptions with regard to national security allow that to take precedence, or would the issue of would it be in favor of the investor, not the state's security?
Just because I know the time's limited. So, yeah, I mean, again, very difficult to answer specific fact pattern, questions in the abstract without a specific fact pattern. But there is the rule for protecting national security is stipulated in the free trade agreement. It wouldn't be as specific to address the situation that you are referring to, but the provisions are broad enough to allow Canada to protect its essential security interests. So if the fact pattern you are explaining would create that type of situation, Canada would have the policy flexibility to do so.
We'll now turn to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you again for continuing to be here, and thank you for your response to my colleague's question about ISDS, because I was a bit confused by the minister's answer that seemed to think that Ukraine was worried about investment situations in Canada, and so if it's the other way around, I can perhaps understand that. But we had this FIPA agreement with Ukraine that's been there for 30 years. I don't know, I've lost 23 plus 5, yeah, 28. No ISDS disputes in that time. How different is the version in this treaty versus the FIPA from 1995? You know, how is it, you know, improved or whatever certainly from a Canadian standpoint?
Well, thank you for the question. The previous Foreign Investment Protection Agreement with Ukraine, or FIPA as we call it, was one of our older generation agreements. So we've, almost 30 years later, we've applied our new FIPA model, which came into effect a few years ago. And in this new FIPA model, it includes new drafting to ensure that parties are able to maintain the right to regulate and provide the policy flexibility in the areas such as environment, culture, indigenous, gender, and cultural diversities. But it also includes a more updated, modernized dispute settlement system, as my colleague was addressing earlier. And one of the important updates is just not encouraging that parties or investors in ISDS cases or state-to-state cases rush to launching disputes. It provides strengthened alternatives options to consider to avoid arbitration, and that would be the key to allow the parties to sit down with the investor to discuss the injury that they claim to have faced and find a way forward without going forward to ultimate dispute settlement system and litigation, sorry. And then the last point I would say is under the modernized ISDS provisions, we also streamline the litigation procedures and make them more accessible to our SMEs, which found themselves outside of being able to take advantage of disputes because they just simply weren't funded to pay for lawyers and whatnot. So it's more inclusive in that regard.
Now, you mentioned Ukraine was considering getting into the CPTPP. The UK is doing that right now. When the UK announced that, New Zealand and Australia signed side letters with the UK taking that ISDS part of the CPTP out of their bilateral agreements, but Canada didn't do that. And if the ISDS is more, as you said, for countries like Canada worried about third world countries and their court systems and their practices, why did we not remove that from our agreement with the UK as we have with the United States?
Well, Mr. Chair, actually, in the case of the CPTPP, the ISDS provisions were already found in the original TPP agreement that we ratified after the United States left the agreement. Canada chose not to sign additional side letters with the UK or any other party to the original agreement that exempted ISDS provisions. In terms of moving forward with ISDS, we are not, since the ISDS provisions were already found in the UK accession to the CPTPP, we chose to leave them there. However, as we move forward in negotiations with the UK on a bilateral free trade agreement, we are not seeking ISDS provisions in that agreement.
So if there are disputes between a Canadian company and the UK or vice versa, they won't be able to access ISDS provisions at all, despite what it says in the CPTPP?
They certainly would be in the CPTPP, but under an eventual bilateral agreement, they could not. In that case of the Canada-UK agreement, they would have to seek recourse through domestic courts.
And just one final question. With the UK accession to the CPTPP, I've been led to believe that that would eventually require a vote here in Parliament. Is that the case, or is it just a done deal?
The government of Canada would have to table legislation in Parliament through a bill for Canada to be able to ratify the UK accession to the CPTPP.
And any idea when that might happen?
No, I do not.
Okay.
You have 30 seconds.
I will cede my time.
Excellent. So then we will move on to Monsieur Martel pour 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to the witnesses.
To speak slowly because I good translate. D'abord, premièrement, je voudrais vous dire.
First of all, I'd like to say once again that the Conservatives support Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. We also support free trade, and the first agreement with Ukraine was done by a Conservative government. When we know that the reconstruction of Ukraine will require a great deal of energy. When there were discussions, did you discuss the issue of energy with Ukraine?
We didn't discuss energy specifically in the negotiation. However, they are covered in both the market access chapter and the services chapter, those provisions to promote energy security or to ensure that market access for any energy services or products are covered by the agreement. But we didn't discuss energy security specifically.
Oui.
I find that, this is just a personal comment, I find it surprising when we know that Ukraine is, with regard to energy, is very much indeed, and we are also experts in LNG, and in Europe, I've been on visits to Germany and elsewhere, and I think Ukraine is lucky to have natural gas, and so the issue of energy. You said earlier that things could be added after the agreement. For example, if later there were discussions which would allow for Canada to export liquid natural gas to Ukraine. Could that be added? Would that be a possibility?
Chair, there's nothing preventing the export of natural gas from Canada to Ukraine or from Ukraine to Canada. We simply don't have the infrastructure in place to facilitate those exports, but there's nothing in the agreement that prevents those exports from taking place.
It's unfortunate that we don't have any infrastructure because in some writing, in my writing, there was an excellent project and everything was ready for exporting LNG to Europe, but there was no strong support from the government at the time. And when you referred to a carbon price, did you analyze the impact of a carbon tax on the efforts to rebuild after the war?
We haven't done that type of analysis in terms of how a potential carbon tax would impact on future reconstruction efforts in Ukraine.
I just wonder, don't you think that's worrying that 70% of coal imported by Ukraine comes from Russia? Which means that the Ukraine has a great deal of difficulty in being more independent of Russia. Don't you find that a bit worrying that 70% of the coal used by Ukraine has to come from Russia?
I'm not really in a position to comment on Ukraine's imports of coal from Russia, and that's a situation that's obviously changing.
10 seconds.
Forget it.
C'est tout?
C'est tout.
Thank you, Mr. Martel. We will now move to Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the panel. First of all, thank you for your work on this extremely important trade agreement. The new CUFTA has, the updated CUFTA, the modernized CUFTA, has some very strong provisions and enforceable provisions related to labor. Can you delve into how this will benefit workers and labor?
Sure, absolutely. I think, as I had mentioned in a previous question, what we agreed to do with the Ukraine as we engaged in these modernization discussions is we explained to the Ukraine that Canada had developed more rigorous provisions in our labor chapter, provisions that are subject to dispute settlement. At various points in the road, we asked Ukraine if they were prepared to take on the higher standard provisions that Canada has been negotiating in a labor chapter, in the CPTPP, in CUSMA, in CETA, and the Ukrainians continued to demonstrate that they didn't want Canada to weaken our typical standards or rules in order to accommodate them. They were striving for the future, and therefore they wanted to negotiate a labor chapter based on the higher standard provisions that Canada has. And as I mentioned, these provisions are fully subject to dispute settlement with binding obligations. There is a feature of a non-derogation clause that prohibits parties to weaken or reduce protections afforded in the respective labor laws taken by measures to promote trade and investment. And also there's a prohibition on any goods in whole or in part produced through forced labor, but also a commitment to adhere to all of the core conventions of the International Labor Organization. Also, there's a standalone provision addressing violence against workers. So those are the features of this chapter.
Thank you. And the modernized agreement also updates and improves the financial services section, and I reviewed that. And we've got some folks in the Soo that are doing some interesting things over in that region and for Ontario, in that matter. Can you tell us how the updated modernized agreement creates a level playing field for both countries?
Well, sure. So the new provisions provide more general rules tailored to the unique nature of the financial sectors in both Canada and Ukraine. The chapter does include core obligations such as market access, as I mentioned earlier, and also supports two key trade policy considerations of affording national treatment and most favored nation status to financial services crossing both borders. There's also new commitments on electronic payments and the processing of applications, and also it includes a more robust prudential exception to ensure our financial sector regulators to preserve the integrity and stability of our financial system. And as I believe I mentioned earlier, we've given Ukraine a 10-year period to transition from its existing commitments it took at the WTO in the financial services sector to the proposed commitments in a modernized CUFTA chapter.
And I understand the process we're undertaking here, but obviously Ukrainian Parliament has, I suppose, a parallel process. Could you describe to the committee what that parallel process is? Or a similar process, or a process?
Well, they have, as I mentioned, they have a similar process as does Canada. The main difference is that, in theory, their process is more streamlined because they have only one chamber, as opposed to in their parliament, as opposed to Canada having two. And they have further flexibility in terms of the number of readings and debates that can take place in their parliament, and also if the president of Ukraine determines that this is an urgent legislation for consideration by cabinet, then there are additional flexibilities to fast track or streamline the process. But again, I'm not really up to date on what Ukraine's plans are to ratify their legislation, and it would be a question I believe this committee should ask when you meet with Ukraine's ambassador to Canada.
Your time, Mr. Sheehan. So we'll now turn to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Just to come back to another question that I asked earlier to the Minister with regard to existing mechanisms, with regard to transparency and fighting corruption and the obligations of businesses. The Minister said that there are Canadian laws that are applicable to Canadian businesses, but there is it true that there is nothing, or there's no forum or a body within this agreement that would be responsible for monitoring the behavior of businesses?
Yes, there are core obligations and transparency provisions, but I'll ask my colleague, Mr. Foster, to address the question more specifically.
Yes, if I understand your question correctly, there is indeed a special dispute settlement provision concerning anti-corruption. It's located inside the dispute settlement chapter. So it's outside of the anti-corruption chapter itself to allow for discussion and resolution of disputes. And the chapter does indeed build on our more broad multilateral obligations on anti-corruption, for example, under the UN Convention on Anti-Corruption.
So basically, as we read the chapter, we see that we encourage businesses to adopt guidelines and principles, things that are recognized internationally with regard to responsible action, social responsibility. But we only refer to voluntary measures. Is that true?
Well, there are indeed minimum core standards with respect to anti-corruption located inside the chapter, and those could be discussed in committee or subject to a dispute. And that this chapter is but one of many ways in which Canada is engaged with Ukraine and supporting Ukraine's anti-corruption and transparency reforms.
A-t-il été démontré par le biais
Is there anything, studies or any research that shows that measures that are strictly voluntary can be successful in this kind of context?
We don't have a specific study on this particular chapter, but indeed there is a great array of literature on Ukraine's anti-corruption reforms available, and we could circulate that after the meeting.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And as I was saying, at the start of my comments in the previous hour, we have some concerns here about the timelines around this. Mr. Christie, you mentioned that this trade deal is signed and it's too late for us to change anything in it. So in some sense, I kind of wonder what we're doing here, but that's another story. But we should have had opportunities to have real discussions among parliamentarians before the negotiations started, so we can get an idea of what your department's objectives are, what your priorities are. In the winter of 2020, the PowerPoint said that you carried out meetings with stakeholders and got, had consultations, but that wasn't done with parliamentarians until after the negotiations started. And they're supposed to, as I say, there's policy that says it should happen well before that. So I'm just wondering, first of all, what are your policies and directives on this? And second of all, if there's any time left, what did you hear from your consultations with stakeholders?
Well, thank you for your questions. Just to clarify my previous comment, I was responding to a question of whether we could sit down with Ukraine at this juncture and negotiate new provisions to the agreement. And since the agreement's signed, our leaders have told us that this text is now ready for ratification. I was not suggesting that this committee could not propose amendments to anything they see in the legislation, and that is certainly within your purview to do that. In terms of our engagement with stakeholders, we did follow our usual process when, before actually we launched our modernized negotiations. After we, as Minister Ng indicated, after we had the original agreement come into force in 2017, at the time we were trying to negotiate services and investment provisions in separate chapters in the original agreement. At the time, Ukraine was not able to meet Canada's standards to do so, so we agreed to include a clause that would require parties to expand the agreement within 2 years, which we've done. When we, I believe, in 2022, officials from my team came and appeared before this committee on 2 occasions. And then prior to launching our modernization negotiations, we did meet on a few occasions with the provinces and territories, both in meetings designated to discuss the benefits of this agreement and their interests in this agreement and how we would modernize it. But we also
Sorry to interrupt, but we're now almost 40 seconds over. So. We're going to have to move on to the next round. So, Mr. Baldinelli, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. And just want to build on some comments that you made earlier, Mr. Christie, when it came to the inclusion of the carbon tax. And what we see is it included in this free trade agreement, but we can't find it in any other free trade agreement, be it CUSMA, CPTPP, CETA, for example. But I mean, the idea for its inclusion must have been from government mandate to have these provisions put in. I mean, we're looking at Section 1310 that deals specifically with climate change, specifically subsection 8H, and it not only earlier talks about the carbon tax and carbon leakage, it also talks about, under Section H there, talks about the rapid transition from unabated coal power to clean energy sources. So if we're going to put in a provision such as H, would you not think that the government would then talk about provisions, put in discussions about energy sources, energy security, so that both nations can work to assist Ukraine to move to those clean energy sources that it has? Was that the mandate of the government, that it did not want to see that included in this agreement?
Thank you for your question. So the new provisions in the environment chapter do recognize the importance of mutually supportive trade and climate change policies, and the importance that one doesn't, climate change or trade and investment promotion measures can't impact on a party's ability to also promote their climate measures. And that would be ultimately to achieve green growth objectives. So we are able to have those discussions after the agreement is implemented, and we review the implementation of the agreement on an annual basis, a discussion on energy sources and energy security. They aren't addressed specifically. These are cooperation-based provisions in the agreement. They're not subject to dispute settlement, but the door is open to discuss any other issue related to environment protection that isn't currently specified in the agreement.
So there's nothing to preclude, for example, another government from asking or including chapters to address this type of provision being included?
Well, a party could recommend including new provisions across the agreement or new chapters, but both parties would have to agree before that was established.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. Also, during your testimony in response to a question from my colleague, you had indicated that no study of the impact of a carbon tax on Ukraine's reconstruction efforts had been factored in or had been taken place. Again, I go back to earlier, just reading on that two-page briefing note that was provided to us just yesterday. It mentioned that Global Affairs Canada, in their March 2023 initial environmental assessment, concluded that modernization is unlikely to result in significant negative environmental impacts. If that was the case, prior to this agreement coming into force, why would the inclusion of a carbon tax and carbon leakage even be required in this agreement? If Global Affairs was already telling the government it's unlikely to result in significant negative environmental impacts.
I think I'll just build on previous comments that the chapter does not require the imposition of a carbon tax in Ukraine. It is very largely cooperation based and based on principles for building on cooperation in this area.
Aspirational, in a sense.
Aspirational, yes.
Well, if that's the case, would it not be aspirational enough to include provisions that deal with energy security, the assistance that Ukraine is going to need in its reconstruction efforts? If we're going to have aspirational aspects included in this agreement, I think that should be one of those aspects that could have been included. And I think it's a hugely missed opportunity on behalf of the Government of Canada. How much time do I still have left?
You have about 30 seconds if you'd like to, or we can.
I'll cede my time.
Can I take the 30 seconds, Chair?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I know we have a meeting coming up on Thursday, and if we could get the list of witnesses for that would be helpful.
I think, Clerk, can we?
To provide that.
Great. That will be provided to all members of the committee. We will now move on to our final round of questioning. Ms. Fortier, you have 5 minutes. Oh, you changed again. Okay. Okay, misunderstood. We'll let Mr. Sidhu go as well. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again to our witnesses for taking the time to be here today. I understand that the government conducted public consultations on the possible modernization of CUFTA back in 2020, and I know we heard from a wide array of stakeholders. Could you update our committee on the feedback that was received from business stakeholders and also maybe the agriculture sector, how this agreement will benefit them?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for your question. So throughout our consultations with Canadian stakeholders, we did hear, I would say, complete support for Canada to move forward with a modernized free trade agreement. The specific areas from the business community that we heard was the importance of including provisions on investment and services, as they would have liked to have seen included in the original CUFTA. So we had strong support voiced to include those chapters. But we also, through our consultations, heard that there was support for including some of the inclusive trade chapters, trade in gender, trade in SMEs, and trade in Indigenous people. And I wasn't part of all of those discussions, Dean. I don't know if there's anything else we heard from our stakeholders in terms of what they'd like to see included.
I would just add that some of the sectors that have expressed interest in the agreement in the context of Ukraine's reconstruction activities include infrastructure, natural resources, financial services, and energy firms, all seeing the agreement as supportive of trade expansion.
Thank you for that. And what about civil society, labor unions? How will this agreement benefit them? Because I know there's a chapter on that as well.
Yes, thank you. Understand that labor stakeholders are supportive. Our Indigenous groups that we work with regularly also supportive of the Trade and Indigenous Peoples chapter, as well as our Trade and Gender Advisory Group, as some examples.
Could you provide our committee with an overview on the updated chapter on the digital trade and how it will improve trade between Canada and Ukraine?
Okay, well, thank you very much. So in the original CUFTA agreement, we had an e-commerce chapter. So under an expanded digital trade chapter, This ensures that custom duties will not be applied to digital products transmitted electronically. So that commitment that Canada has continued to promote at the WTO will be protected in this bilateral agreement. It also expands on the previous chapter on e-commerce by including commitments related to cross-border data flows, data localization, source code disclosure, open government data, and personal data information and protection. It also improves the regulatory certainty for businesses seeking to engage in the digital economy. So it's much more expansive in the coverage from the initial agreement, the initial chapter on e-commerce.
And Mr. Christie, you had mentioned the Ukrainian leadership, Canadian leadership here in Canada, business community stakeholders want us to pass this ASAP to help with the reconstruction. Is that the case you'd want to amplify here as well?
Yes, absolutely. And none of us know how long this war in Ukraine will drag on, but having a free trade agreement implemented where we can, our service providers, our companies, our producers can engage on the ground floor to help Ukraine with the reconstruction efforts. And this free trade agreement well positions us to do so.
How much time do I have left?
50 seconds.
Okay, and so it's pretty much unanimous for, I know the opposition here has to do their job as well, but I think it's pretty much unanimous that stakeholders, governments in both countries, including the Ukrainian community, want this to pass right away, and so I think that's important for the record for those that are watching at home. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to use the chair's prerogative to just briefly ask one question. So what's included in a free trade agreement, and this free trade agreement in particular, what's included and what's not included? That is decided by two things. One, the government's negotiating mandate, or two, what the other party does or does not want in the agreement. Is that a good summary?
I would think so, Mr. Chair. I mean, Canada holds exploratory discussions at the outset to get a sense what the scope and parameters of an agreement would look like and whether our sensitive areas can be accommodated in an agreement, how our offensive versus defensive interests align. And at the end of the day, that those provisions and that flexibility as a negotiator is guided by our cabinet mandate.
Right. Thank you very much. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe I'll adjourn.